sickle. Bleeding saints and forest witches, the past unburied, the books unsealed, the old celebration returning.
Hello, and welcome to my study. Please come in and have a seat. All the books surrounding you are used to research our show, and the individual here to my right, along with managing domestic duties, serves as our reader for any passages that will be directly quoted from these sources. Her name is Mrs. Carswell.
Hello.
Well, as we mentioned in our last show, Mrs. Carswell, with a bit of support from me, is starting on a new venture, the training of bees for a bee circus.
Like a flea circus, but with bees.
Yes, as those of you who have been listening know, Mrs. Carswell and her family have a long history of beekeeping.
Yes.
And, as it turns out, her uncle, back in the day, happened to run just such an enterprise, and his old bee circus equipment is being sent out to help jumpstart the whole thing.
Yes, at least I hope so. I spoke to Mother about it, at least.
But she has someone to pack it up and send it, as you said.
It should be happening. She wouldn't at first, but by the time I hung up, it seemed like she was going to. I just had to listen to her go on and on about them. Not so much Uncle Ebert as Aunt Althea this time. She never approved of their marriage.
But the process is started.
Yes, it's not hard to get to in the attic in the other house.
Well, at least she knows where it all is, and we'll be getting started soon.
Aunt Althea was a big part of the Psychic Bees show. Uncle Ebert said the bees connected with her more because she was blind. They had terrible fights. With Mother, I mean. The three of them. So, well, yes, she'll be sending it all soon, I think.
Well, I hope so. You've already made progress. Mrs. Carswell has already begun training one of her more gifted bees.
Alex.
Training Alex to perform a little trick. I saw it yesterday, and it was actually rather astonishing.
Thank you.
Anyway, I did want to give listeners a heads up on our current show, which is a bit different. The topic was inspired by those recent reports from the Pentagon regarding UFO sightings, or the unidentified aerial phenomena, as they're calling them. It got me thinking of the research I've done earlier on the flying saucer believers and how they were connected with older 19th century occultism. That is, themes a bit more typical of Bone and Sickle. I think it should be entertaining, if a bit of a tangent.
And I have fewer quotes, which gives me more time with Alex.
Yes, I intended that.
It's a shame I can't share my progress with Mother. You'd think she'd be happy for me.
Oh, well...
She just had such a hatred for Aunt Althea.
Anyway, it's fewer quotes and a shorter show. We're trying out this shorter format because I do sometimes hear that listeners get a bit overwhelmed by the waterfall of information in the 45-minute shows. I had to break this one in two halves because it ended up too long. So you'll be hearing the first half now and the other shortly. I actually have some excellent material for a third, but we'll see how these two do first. Think of it as our Summer Saucer series, I guess.
Honestly, I think Mother was just jealous of Aunt Althea because of her blindness and the way the bees took to her. She would scream at Uncle Ebert and say maybe she should blind herself so the bees would love her too. She even mixed up some lye one day, but no one thought she would really do it. Grandmother finally had to step in and put an end to it.
Do I want to know what that means?
No, probably you don't.
No, okay. Well, that's good. Anyway, to our show. Episode 71, Friends from Venus, Theosophists in Space. I am your host, Al Ridenour, and this show, Bone and Sickle, generally examines the intertwining of horror and folklore, this time a bit more science fiction and occultism, all in a historical context. I started the show as a way to further explore these areas of intersection after writing my book, The Krampus and the Old Dark Christmas. Bone and Sickle only exists thanks to the generosity of our Patreon donors who receive monthly rewards, including short bonus episodes. I'll have more on Patreon at the end of our episode.
That can and will be verified at the proper time. I have been instructed by a person from another planet. I have had direct contact with people from other planets. I have ridden in their spaceships. They have taken me to their planet and are by far more advanced spiritually and physically than the people of this planet. At the present time, they are observing us.
The last bit you heard here was from a record sold at talks given by Howard Menger, one of the so-called contactees of the 1950s and 60s, a time when UFOs were simply flying saucers. The visitors weren't the gray aliens who were so busy abducting and probing people throughout the 90s. They were simply space people. They were just like us, only better, spiritually advanced, as you heard, and they didn't mind telling us so.
Can you see or measure an atom? Yet you can explode one.
So what if we do develop this solanite bomb? We'd be even a stronger nation than now.
Stronger. You see? You see? Your stupid minds. Stupid! Stupid!
That's all I'm taking from you.
Get back here, you jerk!
By 1957, when Ed Wood made Plan 9 from Outer Space, this trope of superior aliens hoping to save man from himself was already getting old. It's so deeply encoded in science fiction that you'd hardly stop to think where it comes from, much less suspect 19th century esotericism as a source, but that is where we're headed. In fact, our October 2018 episode on Spiritualism might provide you some good background for our current show. Anyway, we'll only be scratching the surface of this topic, only touching on a few of the major players in the contactee movement who all happened to be named George. And so we'll be talking about three of what they call the Four Georges. And as you may have guessed, a commonality with these Georges is that they tended to talk to people from Venus, a planet which, as we'll see, was associated with bringers of wisdom in 19th century occultism. The space people of the contactees tended to deliver, honestly, wearisome sermons that reflected the teachings of Theosophy, albeit and adulterated for popular consumption to a greater or lesser extent. So let's have a little background on Theosophy, or a refresher on what you may already know. It is primarily associated with the Russian international adventurer Helena Blavatsky, who penned its foundational texts, teachings promulgated by the Theosophy Society, which she co-founded in New York in 1875. Blavatsky had worked as a spirit medium, led seances in the days of spiritualism, and had transformed spiritualism's spirit guides, that would be the people the medium would talk to, into what Theosophy calls its masters of ancient wisdom, advanced adepts from the east, secreting themselves primarily in the mountains of Tibet. And they occupied ageless human bodies, but also could move through the astral realms and communicate their ancient wisdom through messages they channeled to Blavatsky. The core teachings presented in her first major book in 1877, Isis Unveiled, and then 9 years later in The Secret Doctrine, melded elements of Hinduism, Zoroastrianism, the ancient mystery cults, and Egyptian myth, assumed to be all aspects of a single ancient truth destined to replace contemporary sectarian faiths and to bridge the gap between religion and science. Theosophy might not have been widely embraced in all of its arcane specifics, but its broader impact was to spark an interest in Eastern religions in the West and to birth innumerable spiritual paths we generally class as New Age. Many scholars regard Blavatsky's teachings and the success they met with as a sort of response to her contemporary Charles Darwin. If the theory of evolution seemed to be winning the battle against the West's old-fashioned Christianity, Theosophy offered a sort of super religion, something both newer and older and perhaps more robust, and a religion offering its own doctrine of evolution, not biological but spiritual. The Contactee movement arose at a time when science again seemed to threaten the culture in the form of the atomic bomb, and Blavatsky offered here a particularly relevant myth in her retelling of the Atlantis legend. The Atlanteans represented one of her 7 ages of mankind's spiritual evolution. It's far too convoluted to explore here in any depth, but what's relevant is her portrayal of the Atlantean technology, featuring airships powered by a sort of spiritual energy, an example, by the way, of her notion of a higher science melding the spiritual and the technological. As the Atlanteans turned their advanced energies towards dark ends and faced the destruction of their continent, Blavatsky's masters appear from the etheric realm to warn the righteous of Atlantis to flee, much like the saucer people heralding the threat of nuclear annihilation. Among the themes from Theosophy we'll be seeing with the Contactees is this idea of an advanced technology used to manipulate subtle energies, as well as a theological push towards universalism, transformed into the notion of space people welcoming mankind into an extraterrestrial confederation of the spiritually enlightened. One element adapted from Hinduism by Blavatsky and developed further by later Theosophists, Annie Besant, Charles Ledbetter, Alice Bailey, and others, is the figure of Sanat Kumara, who's said to reside on Venus, or the planet's etheric plane. Sanat Kumara is one of the masters, advanced to the level of deity, actually, who leads the Council of Venus, or the 7 holy Kumars, beings equated with Christianity's 7 angels, or the Chaldean 7 rays, and so forth. According to some Theosophists, these highly advanced beings, led by Sanat Kumara, came to Earth to establish a colony some 18 million years ago. This was the kingdom of Shambhala, a floating city hovering in the etheric realm over the Gobi Desert. And it seems worth pointing out that in traditional Tibetan culture, from which the name and concept is borrowed, Shambhala is always represented as a city or arrangement of figures laid out in a circular pattern, a mandala, which brings to mind the psychologist C.G. Jung's comments in his 1957 book, Flying Saucers, A Modern Myth of Things Seen in the Skies, in which he describes the saucers being sighted toward the end of his life, I think this is his last book, as
spontaneous projections,
which appear as
an ostensibly physical fact. The rounded wholeness of the mandala becomes a spaceship controlled by an intelligent being.
But back to Blavatsky. Venus was regarded as the most significant and spiritually advanced of the planets by the Theosophists. In its guise as the morning star, the Theosophists regarded it as a symbol of esoteric illumination and the dawning of a new illuminated era. The Greek name for the morning star, Phosphorus, literally translated means light bearer or light bringer, which in its Latin form, Latin translation, would be Lucifer, the name given to the devil thanks to a passage in the biblical book of Isaiah, heaping scorn upon the king of Babylon and comparing him to the morning star falling. So in Latin translations, it gives us Lucifer falling from heaven and helped to establish the myth of Lucifer as an angel cast down from heaven. Again, back to Blavatsky. In keeping with her notoriously contrarian temperament, she named the journal, which the Theosophy Society published between 1887 and 1897, Lucifer, explaining her choice in a September 1887 article entitled,
The History of a Planet. Venus, the light bringer, has naught to do with darkness and everything with light.
Before discussing our Georges, I want to return for a moment to another contactee, Howard Menger, whose record we heard sampled at the top of the show. The album, released in 1957, was called Authentic Music from Another Planet.
I have also been instructed to tell the people that those hearing this music would get a feeling, would reach an awareness. They would react in their conscious state with understanding and spiritual love for each other.
Along with these spoken intros, it consists of 3 instrumental tracks said to be recreations in a terrestrial studio of music Menger heard on Saturn, a music he played himself under telepathic control of his Saturnian host on an instrument almost exactly like an Earth piano, as it turns out. Music you're hearing now, I apologize, it's not sounding particularly otherworldly. Menger's trip to Saturn was one of several detailed in his 1959 book, From Outer Space to You, the first of many books, as he was one of the more long-lived contactees, writing and speaking about saucers or aliens till his death in 2009. His outer space career, he says, began in 1932, when at the age of 10, he encounters in the woods
The most exquisite woman my young eyes had ever beheld. The warm sunlight caught the highlights of her golden hair as it cascaded around her face and shoulders. The curves of her lovely body were delicately contoured, revealed through the translucent material of clothing, which reminded me of the habit of skiers.
The woman, who is from Venus, which shouldn't be surprising, hints that they have met before a very, very, very long time ago, and then years later, as an adult, a strangely similar-looking blonde at a saucer lecture catches Menger's eye. Her Earth name is Connie Weber, but Menger is granted a past life flashback revealing that they were lovers eons ago on Venus. From this point on, in his writing and in his saucer talks, he referred to his wife Connie as Marla, the name by which the Venusian identified herself, supposedly, and one of the tracks on the record is dedicated to her under that title. I don't have the original track, but I do have a 2012 recording, which is rather lovely.
Marla, Marla, you are my answered prayer, sent from Venus to prove love's everywhere. I must confess that your loveliness dazzles my mortal eyes. You are the all that beauty personifies. Golden tresses.
I'm trying to track down a bit more on that one, but we'll link what I have in the show notes. On May 21st, 1959, the BBC aired a peculiar episode of their show Lifeline. It began with the camera focused on a banner embroidered with Sanskrit, and the audience heard
Sector 6 reporting. From orbital section number 2, relationship Mars, subject demand the truth.
The voice is that of London taxi driver and cosmic contactee George King, whom viewers of Lifeline later saw donning black glasses to channel another entity.
Good evening,
Good evening.
my dear friend.
Your name is?
I am known as Theosophists.
Where do you come from?
The planet Venus.
If you had trouble understanding the Venusian accent, this entity was Aetherius, whose significance is such that he lends his name to the Aetherius Society, which King founded in 1959, and which still exists today in London and Los Angeles primarily, albeit with slightly less emphasis on space people and more on yoga and fulfilling your inner potential and more run-of-the-mill things. King arrived upon the scene a few years later than our other two Georges, but his teachings hew closest to theosophical doctrines. It seems his mother encouraged an interest in esoteric matters, as she was known as a clairvoyant and healer, and by the age of 25, King had become particularly devoted to yoga, which he practiced 8 to 10 hours a day for the next decade, so it says in Aetherius Society publications. Yoga was one thing, but it all got more serious on May 8th, 1954.
One Saturday morning, while I was washing up some dishes, I had a voice, quite definitely a voice out of this world, say to me, "Prepare yourself, you are to become the voice of interplanetary parliament."
Soon after this, King experienced another visit from the cosmic hierarchy.
I was sat in a room, and a man walked through a locked door, across the carpet on the floor, and he was quite physical. When he crossed the boards, they creaked, and he sat down opposite to me and began to talk to me.
In keeping with Blavatsky's masters, this unnamed master had taken the form of a man from India, and it was by him that King was trained to make contact himself with the master Aetherius from Venus. King soon began sharing his channeled teachings, lecturing around England, and opened an Aetherius headquarters in London, and in 1962, in a converted bungalow in Hollywood, and that's where King lived the rest of his life. The Society's foundational text, the 12 Blessings, is a sort of extension of Christ's Sermon on the Mount, delivered to King by Christ himself, or, as he's known in Aetherian and other New Age lore, the Master Jesus, who also is said to reside on Venus. The importance and authority of the channeled material is emphasized in a story involving King's mother, Mary, who, on January 19th, 1959, had a very peculiar experience which King describes in his BBC interview.
I'd like to point out that my mother has traveled in one of these vehicles in a physical body, and she went along to a meeting that was arranged, and she had to walk through mud in a field, and she got her shoes covered with mud. She walked up some steps and into a flying saucer.
This turns out to be merely a scout ship taking Mary to a much larger mothership piloted by Mars Sector 6, as it turns out, and in that ship she meets Jesus and presents him the book written by her son. He places it in a receptacle prepared to its exact dimensions, And as strange and beautiful music sounds from within the craft, bringing Mary to ecstatic tears, the Master Jesus is said to have declared,
"Blessed is he who, reading this book, doth understand, but exalted is he even among angels, who, reading this book, doth take it to his heart and follow its precepts. Tell my son that this book is now and forever holy."
In 1958, on Holdstone Down, which is a mountain near his birthplace in North Devon, King had already had his own meeting with Jesus, who is not quite as we'd expect him. This is the Master Jesus, after all. A May 1971 article from the San Francisco Examiner provides details, quoting King's own writings, saying that Jesus turns out to be
clean-shaven with a firm chin, soft, kind lips, and a well-shaped nose. His skin was tanned a deep golden color. His long, light brown hair fell to his broad, straight shoulders.
And he happens to be carrying a magic wand.
The tall figure from another world then pointed a wand tipped with a 5-pointed crystal star at Dr. King, and a vivid surge of blue flame shot through him.
While King's revelations and encounter stories are on the one hand rather idiosyncratic, other aspects conform to theosophical traditions. There is the universalism with the Buddha also treated as a master, again from Venus. Krishna resides on Saturn. Lao Tzu and Confucius are also masters, along with other teachers who are exclusive to Etherean lore, with names like Jupiter 92 and Zim Coefficient, for instance. And all these are part of the Interplanetary Council, or sometimes the Great White Brotherhood, a term from the Ascended Master school of later Theosophy. Information channeled through or about them was accumulated through King's recorded trance communications, 600 of them on 180 miles of tape, according to one count in the early 1970s. Their teachings about cosmology and spiritual evolution also follow theosophical lines with references to a spiritually and technologically advanced Atlantean stage of civilization as part of human history, beginning not the usual 2 million years ago, but 18, as with Blavatsky. 10 million years ago, the Venusian lord Sanat Kumara hovered over Earth in Shambhala, which is specifically identified as a spacecraft here. In our times, at least 2 ships or satellites named X-90 and XB-70 circle the Earth, undetected thanks to their ability to bend light rays. In his 1961 book, You Are Responsible, King offers a bit more information channeled from Aetherius on these invisible ships.
The masters also use this type of vessel when they are spiritualizing your Earth. They come in these vessels to a certain part of your world, and the spiritual radiations that emanate from them bring about a rise of consciousness.
The Aetherius Society quite enthusiastically embraces Blavatsky's notion of a higher science or a technology used to manipulate subtle energies. Here is George King introducing an invention of this sort in a 1973 film from the Society.
Now this is a metaphysical breakthrough. For the first time on the physical levels of Earth, we can actually store prayer power.
In the film, King stands next to a baby blue plexiglass box the size of a car battery that sits on a tripod. He gestures to a flat white square on the front.
Prayer energy can enter through this area and be arrested by the design of the battery and contained in the crystals within this battery.
The device's design appears to be something of a trade secret. In the voluminous publications by the Society, you won't find any actual specifics on the engineering of such a marvel by King, but its method of use is well documented. Specific prayer services are organized at Etheria's headquarters, during which robed participants vigorously chant select mantras into the device, which you are hearing.
Spreading their light.
And the total man-hours of prayer are logged after each session. Cosmic Masters then alert the Society to impending disasters where prayer energies are needed and batteries should be deployed. Etheria's literature is full of breathless accounts of disasters averted and the recommended number of prayer hours discharged against particular earthquakes, political upheavals, hurricanes, forest fires, oil spills, and nuclear meltdowns. Even before 1973, when King invented these batteries, Etherians deployed their mantras at certain locations for the purpose of planetary healing. Usually these sites would be a mountain, as King had designated 19 of these around the world as something like planetary chakras that must be occasionally charged to keep things running smoothly. But there's only so much that Etherians can do. The theosophical myths of Atlantis and Lemuria, embraced by the Contactees, depict mankind as rather bullheaded and repeating his mistakes. A grim note on which I'll be wrapping up this shorter episode, though we will be continuing the story shortly in our next show. King takes the theosophical myth of Atlantis and goes it one better. Rather than a continent being destroyed through human evil, a whole planet by the name of Maldek, he says, was destroyed in a similar manner, the debris of which still exists in the form of an actual asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. King wasn't the first to suggest a planet once existed between these two heavenly bodies. Already in the late 18th century, astronomers had noted what they believed was a curiously vacant spot between Mars and Jupiter based on presumed regularities within the planetary orbits. The name given it was generally Phaethon, but another contactee, George Hunt Williamson, seems to have introduced the name Maldek around 1953. In the theosophical myth, the destruction of Atlantis is but a single stage of human evolution. It's preceded by the destruction of the continent and people of Lemuria in the Pacific. The Atlanteans arise from survivors of Lemuria, make certain gains, but are destroyed through similar weaknesses. But George King extends that story further back to the planet Maldek. Like Atlantis, their civilization is advanced beyond ours, as he explains in his 1963 book, The Nine Freedoms.
The planet was so highly mechanized that the robots took care of all the menial tasks. The inhabitants had discovered a rudimentary form of space travel and could control the weather so that drought and famine became long forgotten.
But the fable ends as you'd expect, with the discovery of the atomic bomb and Maldek blasted into rubble.
The people who inhabited Maldek were suddenly released into their different etheric planes.
The disembodied souls flee through the ether, eventually reincarnating on the planet Earth as the first Lemurians, and they destroy that civilization, and the same fate then befalls the Atlanteans. It's a miserable process which King feared that humans of the atomic age were poised to repeat.
You better pray to the Lord when you see those flying saucers. It may be the coming of the judgment day. It's a sign, there's no doubt of the trouble that...
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh. The long-awaited Pentagon report on UFOs has finally been released, and it echoes reporting
this
from
morning,
60
a
Minutes.
report that the government cannot
unidentified
explain
flying
those
objects
mysterious
remain just
objects caught
that,
on video
unidentified
by the military.
and mysterious. Here's David Martin.
Who've talked about UFO incursions at missile sites, at nuclear weapons
What if these
storage
unknown
areas?
aircraft showed an interest in our nuclear weapon?
The recent release of UFO reports from the Pentagon emphasizing the tendency of these unexplained aerial phenomena to be sighted around naval ships and military installations. Well, it doesn't take much imagination to connect this to the Contactees space people and their warnings of self-annihilation through our war technologies. A grim note on which we'll end. The notion that you can take the man out of Lemuria, but you can't take the Lemurian out of man. I hope everyone's been enjoying our show and that you might have the opportunity to share episodes with friends, or even better, to leave a review wherever you listen. As I mentioned at the top of the show, these episodes only keep coming out because of the support of our Patreon subscribers. When you donate, you're contributing towards the more than 100 hours I end up putting into each of these episodes. Pledge commitments begin at $1 and can be edited at any time. Something I haven't been mentioning is the Patreon blog I run, where I post extra bits from my research from each episode, extra related tidbits I couldn't fit in, interesting news or video related to the recent topics. I posted a downloadable Braucherei book recently, for instance, and there must be hundreds of those posts to browse through at this point. Those subscribing at the $4 level or higher now receive a short extra episode in the marvelous and rare format. That is a collection of strange historical anecdotes pulled from old books, all dramatized with sound effects and music, of course. Also, when you sign up, you get immediate access to the growing and substantial back archives of rewards. Not only the posts, but the monthly show soundscapes, the scripts, the extra episodes, and whatever level you sign up for, you get the entire back catalog. There are also physical rewards mailed out for higher levels, my Krampus book, the Bone and Sickle candle, and mystery kits. And we may be bringing back the Patreon t-shirts in the next months also. I'd like to welcome those generous souls who pledged their support recently. Thank yous to Corianne Wilson and to James Swartout, who says,
As a mortician, Bone and Sickle has kept me company on more than a couple occasions in the prep room. Thanks for being informative and entertaining.
And we have a Flemish listener in Belgium, Jens van Bureau, who says he is
an old-fashioned folklorist and amateur historian who loves listening with my headphones and my pipe, sitting on the sofa next to my gothic wife and our snoring chihuahua.
Oh, well, that sounds pleasant, and I'd love to hear this sort of thing from more of you out there. Also, thank you very much to Tylom2000 for leaving the great show review. Bone and Sickle is written and produced by me, Al Ridenour. Mrs. Carswell is played by Sarah Chavez, whose projects and writing related to death and culture you can track at sarah-chavez.com. Thanks so much for listening.